muted. And if you have any sort of technical issues or technical points or any questions at any point, please feel free to just pop them in the chat, because we have a wonderful tech team who can do their magic and help you sort it out as soon as possible. Just wanting to appreciate you all for coming here tonight, whether this is your first open call or you've been to all of them so far. We're so grateful that you're spending this time kind of engaging with this huge, momentous moment of change. It's a big thing, right? We're in the middle of this moment. The need for action, the urgency of that action is enormous. And I'm so grateful and humbled to be sharing space with all of you here. So thank you. Thank you for stepping up. Now, let's just take a moment to welcome each other a little bit more broadly. So as we've done in previous open calls, if you have participated in an Extinction Rebellion action before, or whether that's just coming along or coming to a training in whatever way, if you've participated in something in the past, now is the time to unmute yourself and just say a big hello into the space so we can hear your voice. Welcome, everybody.
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Wonderful, wonderful to have you here. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. And if you're new to Extinction Rebellion, now is an opportunity to unmute yourself. You're so welcome here, and I'm so glad that you've come. Now is the time to unmute yourself and say a big hello.
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 Hello. Hi.
So wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for making the time to be with us here tonight. I am going to also just welcome quickly our Facebook Live audiences and our YouTube audiences, as always. We can't see you, but we understand you're here with us in the virtual space. And for those of you who are watching back in the future, hello. And I don't know what's happening in there, but I'm glad you're here if you're watching this back. So I'm just going to start by giving a little bit of framing around the structure of this open call, just reminding people to stay muted so we don't have some backlog for the sound. But I'm going to start with just giving a little bit of framing or structure for the open call if this is your first time, and then talk a little bit about our planning process towards September, which is right around the corner. Today is our sort of last open call before we get right into it. And we will have 2 more open calls after Rebellion begins to kind of check in about the things that are happening, to update people on progress and any sort of other responses and interesting sort of information to get you the information you need to get involved. So those will continue after Rebellion begins, but this is our last one before things actually get going, which is really exciting. So today, the structure of the call will run similar to ones we've had in the past. We'll start by just grounding into the sort of the context of this crisis, where we are now in this moment and why action is needed so urgently. And then we're going to go into a little bit more depth about the sort of objectives for this rebellion specifically. We're doing something radically different, which is necessary, but why? To understand a little bit more about what our sort of carved objectives are for this rebellion and how that fits into a wider plan between now and in the future, and what action looks like within that plan. And then we're going to go into some overview and detail around the sort of phases of this rebellion. So looking at that plan a little bit more specifically. And then after we've done that, we're going to go into a bit of an open Q&A session as we've done. Hopefully half of our meeting will just be able to be devoted to your questions. We want to hear what's coming up for you, how we can answer those questions that are activated for you, and sort of a barrier to getting involved. So that will be a sort of expansive Q&A session. So please keep track of your questions and pop them in the chat when we reach that point of the meeting. Or if they're sort of active for you at any point, you can just pop them in throughout the call, and somebody will magically capture them and bring them into the Q&A session later on. So feel free to just use that chat actively throughout the session tonight. We'll plan to finish the Q&A by about 9 p.m. And say goodbye to anyone who would like to go at that point. But we'd like to offer an invitation, as we did last week, or last time we had an open call, to overflow until about 9:30 and go into some breakout rooms to talk a little bit more specifically about how you can get involved, what your interests are, what you can contribute, and how you can really be part of making this change happen. So we'll have smaller breakout rooms with an opportunity to really speak more directly about how you can find your pathway to involvement. And then we'll be finished by 9:30, fingers crossed, if I can keep to time. And last thing I'll say on structure is that after this evening is done, we will follow up with an email with lots of links and diagrams and information that is going to be named in the call tonight. It will all be in one place. So you needn't worry when we're throwing lots of information and links into the chat and you can't keep up. Know that there will be a follow-up email coming soon, as well as a Rebellion broadcast post tomorrow. If you are somebody who uses that Telegram channel, you can kind of gather that information there as well. So to be continued. And before we move into the content of tonight's session, I'm just going to just introduce the people who are on your screen at the moment, give them a chance to introduce themselves. And as I said before, this is our last open call until we begin our Festival of Resistance and Occupation, which we'll hear more about in a little while. But following that, we will continue our every 2 week, our sort of fortnightly open call to have information about the bus tour as that begins to unfold, and other elements of this plan, and keep those updates coming to you while Rebellion is happening. So more information about those calls coming soon, but just watch the space for more. And without further ado, I'm just going to offer an introduction to us, the people on your screen. We are your open call crew for tonight's session. And I'm just gonna, inviting those of you who are here to unmute yourself and just briefly introduce your role for tonight's session. And I will get us started by saying I'm Rosie, and I will be facilitating and later talking a little bit about those recruitment pathways mentioned.
And I'm Tim Crosland, and I'm a director of the climate litigation charity Plan B, which brings legal actions against the government. I'm also a spokesperson for XR, and I'm going to be setting a little bit of the political context and passing over to Alana.
Thanks, Tim. I'm Alana, and yes, I will be speaking to the objectives today. I also do kind of media and press for XR. Passing on.
Thanks very much. I'm Andy. I'm here this evening to talk about some of the different phases of this particular rebellion, and also here to answer and hopefully answer some of your questions.
Hi, I'm Blythe, and I will be talking about some of the other phases of rebellion, as well as the bus tour a little bit, and answer questions too. Pass over to Ams.
Hi, I'm Ams. I do social media for XR, and tonight I'll be talking a bit about the bus tour media.
Hello everyone, I'm Dolly. I'm helping to pull together the bus tour, so I'll be here to talk to you about that and answer some questions.
Hi folks, I'm Nuala. I'm helping out with a bit of background stuff and tech and collecting your questions for the Q&A session from the chat. And I'll pass over to Ned.
Hello, I'm Ned. I'm pressing lots of buttons. I'll pass back to Rosie.
Thank you, Ned. This is where the magic happens. Like, we're all disappearing one by one. Thank you all for introducing yourselves and for being here to speak to this plan. And without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Tim to begin setting that context. Go ahead, Tim.
So yeah, thank you so much, Rosie, for introducing us with such energy, and thank you to everybody for being here on Sunday evening and not taking maybe what would have been an easier option for Sunday evening. I don't think we've got easy options, the situation we're in right now. And I was just reflecting that I was doing a very similar session in April, before the April Rebellion. And I talked about rebellion as the antidote to the shock doctrine. And I've just been reflecting on what's happened since then, and I felt it made sense just to talk through that in the context of the last few months. And just to recap that idea of the shock doctrine, some of you will be familiar with it, some of you may be less so. It's this idea that no crisis should ever be allowed to go to waste. It's a very cynical concept. The worse the political crisis, the greater the public confusion and disorientation, the easier it is to push through corporate-friendly policies that would otherwise meet popular resistance. And so just going back to 9/11, we saw how that was used to justify war in Iraq so that oil majors like Exxon and BP could get their hands on Iraq's previously nationalized oil industry. We saw how the financial crisis of 2008 was the pretext for austerity policies that have caused so much hardship and suffering. And we were seeing in April already how the war in Ukraine was being used to justify more coal, more oil, more gas, despite all of us knowing what that means. Basically, we've got a political system that creates crisis upon crisis and has learned to exploit those crises to distract the public from the real issues and to overcome democratic resistance to policies that create short-term profit for institutions. So that's what I meant when I was talking about rebellion as the antidote to the shock doctrine, that when we get onto the streets in our masses, disrupting the status quo, forcing ourselves into the public consciousness, that's one of the few tools we've really got to redirect attention to where it needs to be, when we know that others, including the corporate media, are doing exactly the opposite. They're trying to distract people from what's really happening. But since April, I think we've seen the danger that we can't ignore. And that's the danger that civil disobedience and strike action ends up playing into that pattern of crisis that's used to justify the erosion of democratic freedoms. And think about kill the bill. Well, the bill didn't get killed. In all its most pernicious forms, it's become law. And we've now got this deeply authoritarian, fascistic piece of legislation that not only aims to crush democratic dissent and opposition, but makes whole communities of people, Roma, Gypsy, travelers, effectively makes them unlawful, makes their lifestyles, makes their cultures unlawful. And so we're seeing this authoritarian trend that's taken so many forms, including attacks on the BBC, on Channel 4, on all forms of opposition, including the courts. And there's a danger that we end up becoming part of that problem. But think about what authoritarianism, what fascism really stands for. It's anti-democratic. It's using crisis to justify strongman interventions. It's setting people against each other. It's treating communities as less than human. And the antidote to that, a big part of our response to that, is bringing people together through deliberative processes of democracy. And that's why citizens' assemblies, that's why our belief in getting people across our divides, talking to each other, thinking to each other, is so crucial at this point. We're seeing what the government can do. It can persuade the public quite easily that those who take to the streets demanding X, Y, and Z, that they're anti-democratic, that that's the politics of people shouting loudly to try and get their way. So those who are actually suppressing democracy present those who are demanding more as the opposite. And it has never been more crucial that we expose that lie for what it is. But let's also get real. This government is not about to surrender real power to citizens' assemblies, or at least if it does set up a citizens' assembly, it will find ways to render that process meaningless. And that ends up giving citizens' assemblies a bad name. As a democratic movement, XR includes many different people with many different views. But my personal perspective is that this is the time that civil society has to come together and establish its own independent and authentically democratic process. And of course, people are going to ask, but well, what's the point of that? If the government isn't behind it, what's going to come of that? If it's not legally binding, isn't it just going to be ignored? Well, it may be ignored by the government, but I'm not sure that's the point. At least as I see it, it's only when the public clocks that those of us on the street, whether it's unions, whether it's ordinary people demanding change, we are the real Democrats, challenging the deeply anti-democratic forces. And that's when the mobilization across society will reach a critical mass. And if we get it right, the conditions right now, with so many people struggling in so many ways, the cost of living crisis taking place while the energy companies, the arms companies, the food conglomerates, big agriculture are making gazillions, this is the moment it can happen sooner rather than later. No one votes for death and disaster, and it's only by addressing the crisis of democracy that we can properly confront the planetary crisis too. So as I now see it, it's not just civil resistance that's the antidote to the shock doctrine and fascism, it's civil resistance and citizens' assemblies coming together. And we can't wait on this brutal and corrupt government any longer. We're going to have to do it ourselves. Thank you. And passing over to Alana.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that powerful speech to get us going. That was fantastic. So the landscape right now in the UK is ripe for rapid change, and there's huge potential to build a mass mobilization of people focused around a clear plan of action. But if we want to create the change necessary, we know we've got to get serious. We don't have the numbers yet to really test our theory of change and show the government what we're made of. But polling shows that 8 out of 10 people are concerned about the climate emergency. So there are millions of people waiting in the wings to take action if we can only reach them. Not only that, we're of course in a cost of living crisis. That means millions of people won't be able to pay their bills this winter. Part of our role is to highlight how climate and cost of living intersect, and why our out of touch and out of date politics is responsible for both. Because the climate crisis and the crisis in our society are two parts of the same story. It's an old story where the majority of us are forced to pay for crises not of our making, while a tiny minority profit from our struggle, supported by politicians too corrupt or too concerned with the next election cycle to recognise the urgency of the moment. So mapping out a journey to success is crucial. We've talked about mass mobilisation a lot in XR and how to reach a tipping point of 3.5% of the population to come into active support. But we've struggled to pin down a clear moment to mobilise towards, and a plan of action with stepping stones built in that climb towards success and take people on a journey they can believe in. Well, not anymore. Now there's a plan that will take us from today, this open call right now, to the streets in September and October, building our way to 100,000 people taking action together in spring next year to finish the job. We want to define success in our own terms and finish each phase of the plan on a high, sending us into the next phase with improved numbers, energy, skills, understanding, and with everyone feeling a part of a movement as an active member with a role and purpose. To help us define success, we identified 3 objectives. Number 1, to grow Extinction Rebellion in numbers and develop our vision for the future. Number 2, make mobilization fun, genuinely rewarding, and a focus for everyone in the movement. 3, to make citizens' assemblies relevant and inspiring for everyone. These objectives center people power because our mission is to build a movement that is impossible to ignore. September will boost energy and build momentum as a first step in a laser-focused strategy that sees Extinction Rebellion growing in numbers and building momentum towards spring 2023. Politics, as usual, will do anything to avoid facing up to the reality of the climate and ecological crisis. So without large numbers out on the streets, our demands will be ignored. This roadmap to success will begin with fierce mobilization, connecting with communities across the UK in September. This will be followed by mass disruptive action together with other groups for maximum impact this October, focusing our outrage at the cost of living scandal into solidarity actions. Following this, XR will be focused primarily on growing the movement and targeting all of our energy towards spring 2023. Passing over to Blythe, Andy and Blythe, sorry.
Thank you very much, Nuala. That's really fantastic to hear. And like, like Alana said, this rebellion is designed differently to ensure that we kind of grow from strength to strength from each phase. And the timeline that will be shared on your screen in a second will give you a kind of brief overview that covers how broad that journey is. And what we're going to do in a second is we're going to dive into each phase with a little bit more detail and just explain how those kind of phases relate to each other and how we jump from one to the next. The rebellion plan has taken into consideration the political landscape, and it's probably best placed as it can be to have the biggest impact on those kind of pillars of power. And what's really important to remember is that we're keen that all rebels approach each phase with the kind of energy that they would typically bring to the previous rebellions, so that we can focus everyone's energy into each of these phases to ensure they're as successful as they can be. And that's going to create those stepping stones and the momentum that will build and build and build as we jump from one phase to the other, and hopefully increase our numbers as we jump between the phases. So Blythe now is just going to dive into phase one, and then we'll give a little bit more info about the rest of the phases.
Cool, thanks, Andy. So the 5 phases of rebellion will kick off with a grand curtain raiser action. So this action is designed to grab the media's attention and shine the spotlight on citizens' assemblies like we never have done before. It will be an audacious, thought-provoking, and cheeky action that will expose the desperate need for radical democracy. Unfortunately, we can't tell you exactly what that will involve, but it will tie into the arrival of our new unelected Prime Minister on the 5th of September. So you'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. Also in the first phase, we will go to the streets on Friday, September the 9th, and cover the capital. It will be the night before the 5th Festival of Resistance, and we will reclaim advertising spaces en masse through an accessible and disruptive Paint the Streets action in central London. Rebels from across the nation will blanket London with thousands of pieces of replacement advertising. We will present to the capital a message of truth, resistance, and a positive vision for an upgraded system of politics which represents all of us and our communities, and offer an invitation to join the Festival of Resistance in Hyde Park, which is the following stage. So this is a perfect opportunity for new rebels to be welcomed into our movement and forge fresh relationships, as you will have the freedom to pick and choose between a selection of low-risk space actions in groups of about 5 to 10. So you'll have a choice between 2 offerings. These will be bus stop adverts and tube ads. And I think that I'm going to hand over to Yaz now to share a video to show you exactly how that will work. Just checking Yaz is definitely here. Yes, thanks, Yaz.
It's the only thing, it's the only lonely shakes the ground. Oh, what a lovely sound. Oh, how it shakes the ground. Oh, what a lovely sound. Oh, oh, what a lovely sound.
Great, so that gives you a bit of an idea of what it will look like. Thank you to the Mystery Invisible video sharer. If you want to join those Paint the Streets Telegram chats to participate in that part of the fate of Rebellion, I'm going to post those in, they've been posted in the chat now. That's brilliant. So if you take your eyes to the chat, you'll be able to see exactly how you can get involved in that. And that will be via a Telegram chat. You'll need to download the app, or via a Google form. So come to London on Friday, the 9th of September. It will be in an easily accessible location in East London, where we will build teams, provide briefings, and offer resources. The location is being kept under wraps, but will be announced soon. So check the Telegram for that. Thank you so much, and I'll hand back to Andy for the next phase.
Brilliant. Thank you, Blythe. Okay, phase 2 is the occupation. On Saturday, the 10th of September, the day after the action that Blythe just described, we will meet at Marble Arch at 10 a.m. So that's Saturday the 10th at 10 a.m. And the occupation begins in Hyde Park, where we will set up camp for 3 days and nights. And during that occupation, we're encouraging everyone to camp on site and to get stuck in and really help build that community that demonstrates our vision of the future. The occupation has been pre-liaised, but that does still come with a slight risk. And so we need rebels who are ready to spring into action if needed. Regions have designated areas, and we are encouraging local groups and community groups to get together and self-organize within those designated areas and to really help build that camp. And on Sunday, we'll be demonstrating deliberative democracy. We will host a People's Assembly, the first of many that will be happening across the country, that reach out to the communities in the city to join and participate in that process. We will also be welcoming in other campaigns from the whole of the ecology of resistance into the village, and inviting them to arrive with their own setup to speak and share their campaigns, with the aim to kind of cross-pollinate with ideas and expand our own networks. And on top of all this, we'll be modeling the vision of the future we want to see. So we'll be sharing food, there'll be music, there'll be trainings, there'll be listening circles, there'll be all the other great stuff that XR is like so good at. And whilst we're doing that, we'll be demonstrating our resilient community spirit, and we will be filled with love and be welcoming people into that space. And by the time you leave, you'll be infused to go back to your communities with the skills you need to make phase 3 a growing success. But before we leave London, on Tuesday, the 13th of September, once we've packed up the park, we'll be marching en masse to Parliament to deliver a simple and beautiful message to the new Prime Minister. So make sure you stick around and be part of that mass participation action. I'm going to hand back to Blythe now, who's going to tell you more about phase 3.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So for phase 3, after the festival comes the bus tours. This is something quite different as well. 3 coaches are going to be ready and waiting to travel the UK from London to Northern Ireland, Scotland, and the Midlands. So I think you're going to, so basically, these coaches will go around the country building outreach. And yes, you can see the routes here now, actually, on the screen. This is just a very rough draft at the moment, as the routes are in progress. So all those stops are to be some of those stops are still to be confirmed. But so these buses will go out across the country along the kind of routes you can see here, and they will build outreach capacity in existing local groups and also speak to non-rebels in areas where local groups have not yet emerged. So the purpose of these bus tours is threefold. It will involve listening to people via people's assemblies happening every weekend in each region, as well as digitally for those who can't attend in person. So there'll be online ones and in-person ones. And these people's assemblies will collect vital information on how XR supporters are thinking and feeling, so that at the end of these 3 tours, we will have valuable insights to learn from and share. The second purpose of the bus tours is to educate people about the potential of citizens' assemblies to tackle the climate and ecological emergency, as well as the cost of living crisis and linked crises. This will unfold via outreach, as well as the process of running people's assemblies. And then thirdly, the tours will have the purpose of mobilizing, which is obviously hugely important if we want to build the numbers for the later rebellion phases, when things will get much more exciting. So Andy, do you want to take over?
Thank you very much, Blythe. Phase 4, on October the 14th, we will partake in a mass act of civil disobedience directed at the pillars of power that will be very much about the cost of living crisis. We'll be reaching out and working strategically with other movements to ensure our action has an impact. And we'll be platforming the struggle of everyday people to heat their homes and feed their families. And we'll also be helping connect the dots between the end of the month and the end of the world. So take off Friday, October the 14th, and be prepared to stay until you are removed. And there'll be more info coming very soon on that.
Lastly, the final phase of rebellion, which is following the October action, which the October action will act as a stepping stone towards the big one. Following this, we will further focus our energy on growth. There will be a giant push to reach 3.5% of the population. It will be larger in scale and longer in duration than anything we have ever tried before. To kick it off, we will prepare and do a final mobilizing push, culminating in a mass action in spring next year. This unprecedented action will involve 100,000 people taking action together until we become impossible for the government to ignore. Each phase of this 5-phase plan depends on the last. We need to grow and then recommence mass civil disobedience. In order for it to work, we need everyone to help however they can. So whatever your skills, there is a place for you in this movement. And I'm going to pass it on to Rosie now to guide us through the ways in which you can get involved.
Thank you, Blythe and Andy, for speaking so beautifully about those different phases of our radically different plan. And as you say, it's just so important that we think of this as not just one rebellion in this sort of 6-month cycle we've been going round and round in for the last few years, but instead of the maturity of a plan that doesn't just look into the immediate future, but also looks into the greater future. Where do we go next? And how does the work that we're doing now to set that foundation feed into the work we're doing in the future and that wider sort of movement of change? So thank you both for speaking so beautifully to that. As Blythe said, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about how you can find your way to get involved in this plan. And I'm going to just, before I start speaking about things, I'm going to just pop some links in the chat for your reference, and then I will describe what they are as we go, just so you can kind of know that they're there. So I'm going to start by just describing the volunteer platform, which is the first thing that is referenced in what I just posted in the chat. And now the volunteer platform is if you have time to give, it's the space we're really encouraging you to come back to and check the roles that are listed on there. We have lots of exciting roles that are getting involved in many different aspects of this movement to help feed into this plan. in many, many different ways. Now, these are the roles that tend to be put on the volunteer platform are sort of more coordination roles. So they're kind of holding or bottom lining certain areas. And so if you were interested in any of those areas or had time to give and don't necessarily feel like you're interested in those areas, but want to feed in that sort of way, then send us an email, write an application, just get in touch with us. And one of our team, our recruitment team, will call you up and just have a conversation, can answer any questions and help you find your sort of home in terms of this pathway. So please sign up via the volunteer platform if you have time and energy or are kind of looking for your place to get involved. The next thing on that list is referencing the We Are All Crew Telegram channel. And so for those of you who are not tech savvy, as I certainly did not consider myself to be any sort of tech savvy before getting involved in XR, I think that has been a tech pathway for many of us. But if you are not tech savvy and don't know what Telegram is, we've mentioned it quite a few times. It is a messaging app that has broadcast channels as well as kind of direct chats. And that is often a space that we go to. It's really easy to join a chat in Telegram, and it's very user-friendly platform. So some of our big kind of broadcast spaces, including the Rebellion broadcast, as referenced before, are on the Telegram app, and I'm sure somebody can answer any questions about how to download that and get involved in the chat. If you have them, please feel free to put them in there. We Are All Crew is a chat that every day we send out messages saying this task needs to be done, or this team is looking for support, or here's how you get involved in this this aspect of the rebellion, from programming to sustenance to transport and logistics to campsite cleanup and upkeep, etc. All sorts of different ways of getting involved, either from now to help us build this rebellion, help us bring it into life, or on the ground during the Festival of Resistance, or getting involved in the bus tour and beyond. So please join that channel if you have any time to give, even if that's just an hour a week or 2 hours a week, and you don't have a lot more than that, but want to be involved, want to be participating. That would be the space to start to sort of see the kind of different areas of involvement. So join We Are All Crew if you have time to give. And the other thing that is listed under that is the sort of the all pathways or groups that are looking for support. And that's a kind of a comprehensive list of lots of different circles that are feeding into this plan actively and looking for extra people to help them achieve what they need to do to get things ready. So if you're kind of curious in all the sort of, to know all the different groups that you could get involved in and just want to have a look at that, that's a good document to kind of check out. As has already been mentioned, as Blythe spoke about, Cover the Capitol, or sort of paint the streets of this rebellion. The sign up form has already been posted there, but it's in this list as well. Please sign up to get involved in that. It's going to be such an exciting night and a really wonderful way of meeting other people who are involved in the movement and who are interested in doing something. And what a wonderful vision to wake up on Saturday morning as we launch our Festival of Resistance with this London splash of color and information. So and I noticed a couple of people had mentioned in the chat about Paint the Streets happening outside of London, and absolutely there are lots of posters and leaflets and flyers that are on their way. That information will be posted in the Rebellion broadcast as soon as it's available, as well as through your sort of local group or Hive representative as well. So feel free to check in there. Paint the Streets is always a welcome thing to happen and signpost towards the rebellion. So thank you for naming that and for being involved in that way. Switching focus a little bit from some of those channels to get involved in, we're really looking for people to start building our bus crews. So another wonderful way to get involved is to join us on one of our buses traveling around the UK. You know, seeing that map embodied was so exciting to sort of see these routes as they sort of cement themselves. And as has already been mentioned by Blythe, that map will be sent around as soon as it's really solidified with the local groups. We're doing a lot of liaising directly with local groups, and as soon as those different sites are solidified and the dates that it will be that the buses will be in those areas, we will get that information to you. But we want wanted to kind of give you an insight into where those routes were flowing around the UK for the purposes of tonight's meeting, and that those locations and routes will be available to you very, very soon. But if you want to actually be part of a bus tour, you do not have to commit to a month of being on a bus. you can commit to just a few days or a week and be part of this. As it was said earlier in the meeting, the importance of investing the same kind of energy in this mobilization effort that we do for other rebellions that we've been involved in. So this is a really key aspect of just going and learning and listening and engaging and mobilizing, doing this work around the UK, and not being so London centric, but instead going and reaching people where they're coming from. So that, please get involved, apply to be part of the bus cruise. That's another really wonderful way to be part of this exciting and different way that we're hosting a rebellion. And similarly, if you are interested in that but not quite ready to apply, there's a bus tour open call this Thursday, and we need you to be there if you have interest in being involved in the bus crew and the bus tour in any way, whether that's developing the plan, whether it's making it happen, whether it's liaising with the local groups, or whether it's sitting on one of those buses and going and doing some outreach on some different stops along the way. Then there's going to be an open call on Thursday at 7 p.m. The link for registration is in the chat. And that's going to be a wonderful opportunity also to ask questions about in more detail and find out more about the bus tour and how that's kind of unfolding at the moment. In the spirit of not trying to give you too much more information, because I'm realizing I'm just listing lots of things off, I have just a couple more things to signpost to you, and then I will move us into our Q&A. Just to say that that referenced in last open call from our legal speaker presenter last time. We have some Know Your Rights trainings that have been updated with the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill kind of information or Act information. And so there's a really great references in terms of how to keep ourselves informed as we engage in nonviolent direct action, because when you're informed, you feel much more empowered to act. And that's a really important piece of that puzzle. So you can join their teams on there are sort of 2 sessions before Rebellion, Tuesday the 30th of August between 6 and 8 p.m. And Wednesday the 7th of September between 6 and 8 as well. And as I said, those links are in the chat for you if you'd like to register, but also check out the Rebellion broadcast tomorrow, and there'll be more information on there and links to take you to the right spaces. So those are some pathways, lots of information and some pathways to get involved at this point. But please, if you have time and you're able to stay with us at 9 o'clock, from between 9 and 9:30, to just check in these smaller breakout rooms to help you find your place, to help you find your home in getting involved. We'd be really glad to see you and for you to stick around for that extra time. So I'm going to pause there. Take a breath. That was a lot of information. Recognize there's a lot going on, and the machinations of this movement are quite fascinating, right? There's so many people who are giving so much time and energy into making this work, and we really need you to be part of that if you have time and eagerness to be involved. So without further ado, I'm going to switch focus to our Q&A session. And before we go into the sort of nuance of these questions, I'm just going to invite you to post your questions that are coming up for you in the chat if you haven't already, and somebody will capture them. We'll answer as many of them as we can. And if we don't have time to answer all of the questions tonight, then we will update our FAQ section on the website, which, if you haven't already seen it, has a lot of FAQs that are available there too, specifically to this rebellion. And I'm hoping that Ned or somebody who has a tech savvy brain can put the link to that web page in the chat so people can see. And like magic, there it goes. So bring your eyes to the chat if you'd like to sort of see an easy link to the FAQ page about this rebellion. There's lots of key information there, and we'll keep updating that with other questions that we don't have time to get to tonight. And it will also be in the follow-up email too. Yes, thank you, Nuala. So to get us started, I'm going to lead with a question. I'm going to pass over to Andy to lead with a question about why is there less disruption and fewer arrestable actions in this specific plan? Referencing, for those of you who are new to the movement, referencing in previous embodiments of XR's rebellion, as we call it, these sort of like push these actions of civil disobedience and that risk or do lead to arrest are obviously a key part of Extinction Rebellion's theory of change. And so there's a question of why is there less of that this time around? Is that because we've moved away from that aspect of our theory of change, or what is the reason for that? And I'm going to pass over to Andy to answer.
Thanks, Rosie. No, we have not moved away from our theory of change. If anything, I think we've tried to distill the essence of it. And the essence of our theory of change is about mass participation. It's about everyone taking part and everyone getting involved. And that is where our power lies. And that is something that we never fully tested as Extinction Rebellion. So this rebellion is very much focused on that and actually really pushing it to ensure that we can push that as far as we possibly can. And at the moment, like all the intros we had at the beginning have mentioned, it's kind of ripe at the moment. There are lots of disgruntled people who are who've taken great umbrage at how they're being dealt a bad hand by this government. So what we're looking for is capturing that energy and bringing some of that energy and making sure that we can really test our true theory of change. So it may feel like there are less spicy actions, but actually what we're trying to do is try and point everyone to the mass participation elements to make sure everyone gets involved in those. What we don't want is this scattergun approach that's happened at previous rebellions, where our resources and energy is kind of distilled out amongst lots of different actions. What we're trying to do is focus all our energy into one point, which is where our power lies. So yeah, in my opinion, we're right where our theory of change should be.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for speaking to that. So I'm in thinking about that concept of disruption, we are also aware that we are a part of a wider movement for change. And I'm going to bring in Andy to just extend your time speaking to answer a question about how does this plan link with Just Stop Oil that is started on the 1st of October, and what does that relationship look like with other movements?
Thanks, Rosie. So there are lots of other groups, not just Stop Oil, taking action in October. There's a huge amount of people. Greenpeace are taking action. Enough is Enough have declared that they will be taking action on the 1st of October, along as well as Just Stop Oil and lots of other groups. So we won't be the only people in the street in October, and we are not openly collaborating with any other groups in that regard, but what we are doing is aligning strategically to make sure that our action has the biggest impact it possibly can. So we've been discussing dates and how they kind of interact with each other. So we are, an umbrella. We are an ecology of movements. We're all taking action together for the same cause. So we're aligned in that regard, and those discussions have happened to ensure that those dates that have been chosen are the most effective that they can be.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm going to shift focus a little bit. There are some questions in the chat about camping and accommodation. So I'm going to bring in Blythe to answer the question about, will my wife be able to stay in her camper van on September 10th to 12th, which is obviously a specific question for that person's wife, but also there's a bigger question there of like, what does that camping look like? What is our access to accommodation at this time? And specifically also bringing in a question, if I were to join the Paint the Streets in London event on the 9th, where would I be staying, as the camping currently says it begins on the 10th. So Blythe, if you could answer that, that would be great.
So in terms of camper van, I'm not sure you'd be able to actually drive the camper van into Hyde Park. Unfortunately, there'll be campsites around the main stage and the other areas. So everyone will be able to come and camp like together. It'll be, and there's another site available. So I think if you have vehicles that you want to camp in, then I'd just wait and see and follow the Rebellion broadcast for updates and more information on that.
Yeah, thank you, Blythe, and bringing in Yaz also, if you wanted to speak a little bit more to the to that as well, because I noticed that you had your hand up to speak as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure, happy to. Thanks, Rosie. So that night before, the Friday the 9th, there is going to be camping happening, although it's going to be at a different location, and the actual location isn't being announced just yet. And if you follow the Paint the Streets Telegram or the broadcast post that's linked in what I've just popped in the chat there, you can keep in touch with that location when it arises.
Great, thank you, Yaz. So there are a few questions as well about this kind of this phase 4 on the 14th of October. So I'm gonna invite Andy to speak a little bit more to that. So can we know what's going on the 14th of October? And also when will we have more information about that and how we get involved? So those are some questions that are sort of bubbling up around this mysterious 14th of October. So I'm gonna bring Andy in to hopefully give us a little bit of clarity.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. There are still some unknowns because at the moment the landscape is very fluid around the cost of living crisis. So we don't know for sure who our Prime Minister will be. We don't know for sure whether she will be still in power by October the 14th. And that's who I think it's likely to be. So there are lots of unknowns in and around what's happening in October at the moment. So we're super keen to ensure that whatever happens on the 14th is flexible and fluid enough to respond to some of those things. What we do know is that it'll be very much targeted at the pillars of power. We do know it will be mass participation, and what we want to do is ensure that everyone in the movement comes to that particular action and takes part in it. There will be space and roles for there'll be a wide range of roles basically. So it'll be inclusive for everyone to come and participate in that action. But yes, at the moment, there are still quite a few unknowns. We will be pushing out information as soon as possible to ensure that you guys can book travel and everything else that you need to do. So we will be pushing that information out as soon as we can.
Great, thank you, Andy. Really, really helpful. So I'm gonna invite Nuala to speak to a different question around the Festival of Resistance. We have a few other questions about the Festival of Resistance. This is one of many, and I'm going to bring in Nuala to answer the question of, will climate justice be any part of the September resistance? Go ahead, Nuala.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, I think the main thing to say is that the beautiful thing about the Festival of Resistance is that it's going to involve lots of different movements and different voices and chances to learn from each other and hear from each other's perspectives. And so it'll include climate justice in terms of who we invite there and the things they can speak to about how this crisis is impacting all of us differently around the world and within the UK as well. So I'm not going to give any much more detail than that, but yes, it will, basically.
Yeah, thank you, Nuala. And just while we're at it, speaking about that that inclusivity of other movements, other voices, other experiences, I wonder if you could also answer the question, do we have any labor unions involved in this plan? And how do we as XR engage with emergent trade unionism in response to the cost of living assault? I'm wondering if you would be willing to speak to that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. So there's a group which people may or may not be aware of called XR Trade Unions, who are doing brilliant work showing solidarity, and many of them are union members as well as members of XR. So if you go to the news section of our website, you can see a statement about our support for striking workers. And they are going out on the picket lines and building those relationships, and our relationships team is doing the same. And that is so important, you know, that we're in a cost of living crisis. We're seeing the fossil fuel companies making record profits. and people unable to pay their bills, it's so clear that our causes are aligned, and that a like healthy, safe, fair way forward lies in us working together to solve both of these crises.
Absolutely, it's so important, Nuala. Thank you for speaking to that. I'm gonna also sort of, while we're talking about different groups and how to get involved, and whether that's XR trade unions in terms of the Festival of Resistance, or whether that's the concept of climate justice, I'm also going to sort of bring in this question of, will there be XR family space in all of these phases, and is this rebellion inclusive for people of all ages and experiences? And I'm wondering if somebody would be able to answer that as well. Just unmute yourself if you are popping up, and happy to speak to that, if there are going to be XR family spaces.
Yeah, I can speak to that one. Yes, there will be definitely XR family spaces at the Festival of Resistance, at the occupation. At the moment, we haven't confirmed whether XR families will be at the October the 14th phase 4 action, but there's likely to be something going on in and around that site somewhere, if maybe not directly at the action. So typically, yes, we try and make our spaces as open and inclusive as possible. Sometimes that's always a little bit challenging, but yes, we invite everyone to come into that space, and we'll welcome you all with open arms.
Absolutely, thank you, Andy. So I'm conscious of time, and we have just a few more questions that we're going to have time for. But as I said, we will incorporate all the other questions. We have them all in a document now. We've captured them, and we will sort of collate those into some clear FAQs that we can then transfer onto the website as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that FAQ part of our website, for your question to be answered hopefully there, if it has not already been answered by tonight's session. So I'm going to pass over to Blythe to answer the question of, how do I find a local group who are going? Do I just post on their Facebook page? How do I connect with local groups and find other people to engage with this with? Go ahead, Blythe.
So if you're new to XR, this is a particularly useful thing to know, I think, because that local groups are a great place to start in XR. So you can message any of their social media pages if you find those, and the best way is to go via this map, or there's it's been posted in the chat, so via there. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Blythe. And another question I'm going to make sure we have time for is about transportation. And I know, Andy, you've also posted this in the chat, but I wondered if you wanted to speak a little bit more generally about how transport is being subsidized and supported to make sure that people can come to London for the Festival of Resistance if they would like to. So over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the link in the chat I posted just earlier will answer most of your questions. But again, this comes down to kind of trying to make our rebellions as accessible to as many people as possible. And there are obviously huge costs incurred in travel, especially from the north of England or the very southwest of England, where, you know, it's long train journeys or coach journeys to get up to London. There is a travel transport subsidy form. I am going to repost it in the chat again, just so it's relevant. There we go. And that should be able to help you if you need some financial help with your transport costs to get to London. There is a limit on it, I believe, and a cap, but it should certainly go some way to helping you attend.
Amazing, thank you, Andy. And last but not least, I'm going to ask, and I'm going to invite Nuala to answer this question: when will the date of the big one be announced? And I'm going to just expand that a little bit to say, when will the date and the information about the big one be announced? In thinking about that wider picture of, this is not just this one moment, this is part of a wider moment of building up to that big moment. And I'm wanting to give you a chance to answer that, Nuala, about when more information will be available about that next stage.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, so there's a couple of things to say about this. One is that the reason we haven't got that information for people right now is because we are basically, you know, we're aiming to have 100,000 people out on the streets next spring, and to get there, there's all sorts of things we're going to need to do. We're going to need to do outreach. You know, lots of people have been working with Project 3.5, and that's brilliant, and that will need to continue. And another thing we're going to need to do is build relationships with other groups and work together. Like the amount of groups now who are demanding an end to new fossil fuels is quite incredible. It's like an alignment is happening, and we're really in a moment of possibility for big change. And so we're trying not to put too much out set in stone right now, because we want to build those relationships and figure out how we can work together and have strength in our unity and numbers. But that said, we do know also that people have ended up getting dates late in previous times, and you know, we already know it's going to be spring. It's not going to take us too much to nail it down, and we'll get that info to people like as soon as possible, so that people can plan and have their time respected in that way. So hopefully that's a useful answer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nuala, for speaking to that. And I'm just going to be really cheeky and answer one more really quick question in the chat, which is, do we have to pay to go on the bus tour? And the answer is no. You just apply, and it's part of being a part of this rebellion. So please just apply and be involved. We'd love new voices to be coming and spreading the message around the UK. So please step up if that's something you're interested in. You do not have to pay to participate. So thank you for clarifying that. That's a really good question. And thank you all for coming and staying with us on this Sunday evening. I'm going to, as I said at the beginning of the call, we're going to sort of put a little break here for those of you who are ready to sign off and say goodnight. Thank you for coming. And we'll do a little bit of a closure in just a minute. But for those of you who would like to stay on until 9:30 to find your pathway into getting involved in a more dynamic way, whether that's getting involved in the bus tour development, or whether that's being a part of a bus crew, or whether that's joining a team in the Festival of Resistance, or something completely different. As we mentioned before, there are so many different ways of getting involved. So we'll go into smaller breakout rooms to explore different pathways that were mentioned earlier in a little bit more detail. So that will be our next part of tonight's session. If you are not wanting to stick around for that, then that's absolutely okay. And we're just going to find some ending to the meeting now, so that we can kind of go into those breakout rooms for those of you who want to stick around.